Just form a fucking wall.
O'Neal deep in the post, lots of contact there. Oh, what a block by Wallace! What a jump ball!
Pistons down 4, 12-8, 7:38 to play in the first. A burst from Rodney, stuck into the rim. Count that baby and a foul. Reggie inside for Andre and a dynamite dunk.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and as always, I'm joined by Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's a great new time for the Palace of Pistons Podcast. Some exciting news, an exciting time. I'm happy to bring it in this new time with the original co-host of the show with me. So very, very exciting times, Mike.
Yes. Somewhat exciting times for the Pistons as well. Lots of change. Unfortunately, no big news to break down regarding Blake Griffin. Has not been bought out. Has not changed teams. Hopefully that will happen in the coming weeks here. But, in the meantime, you get a good look at some of these young Pistons. And we'll be definitely talking about several of them today, as well as the coach who's going to be maybe leading the charge the rest of the way. We're not exactly sure. But for Detroit, very, very young team. They've had a lot of ups and downs and mostly downs. Outside of Blake Griffin, who's obviously the most disappointing Piston that we have seen, at least this year. Outside of him, who has been the most disappointing player for the Pistons?
Yeah, that's a good question because there's definitely have been some disappointing players so far this season. And I think you can go in multiple directions here because there are multiple guys that have underperformed this season and haven't lived up to what maybe was hoped for them. I think one guy that I don't really think has played bad this season, but I was just expecting more out of was Sekou Doumbouya. He's kind of been in and out of the rotation, but he's just not doing anything to really showcase, hey, I'm here, year 2, I've improved a lot, I'm ready to go. This is the next iteration, the next step that I've taken. I don't think it's entirely on him. I think he's being pigeonholed into a situation that's not exactly great for him. He doesn't have a major role in the offense. His minutes are sporadic. But at the same time, this is a player that is not shooting the ball well, under 36% on the season. He started off the year hot from beyond the arc. He's down to 27.3% from the three-point line. He is not some elite defender. I think he's had some nice games. Definitely when the Pistons played the Bucks like 3 times in 4 games. He had some nice moments against Giannis. He's had games where he's had all around good performances. But there have been too many nights where he just doesn't look, I don't know, maybe comfortable is the right word to use, or he looks passive. He's got a lot of tools. He's still very young. He's still very raw. This is by no means me giving up on him because I am still confident that he will be a good NBA player. But I will say I was expecting a little bit more out of him this season. Granted, when the Pistons drafted him, the honest truth, the point of it was, look, this guy is raw. This is a project type prospect. I just thought the project would have maybe had a little bit more progress completed 26 games into year 2.
He looks unpolished. He looks unpolished. Is there a player who would benefit more from the G League than him? I mean, you could argue that Dennis Smith Jr. would. He was willing to accept a G League bubble stint, to improve his game with the Knicks and try to find a role with them. So, I think it's certainly possible that he just needs time in the G League. He needs consistent playing time. He has not had that, but he looks unpolished. You're right. He is passive. And I think some of those things get ironed out a little bit when you just body up people in the G League and you just dominate them because you're a more physical being. But he does look passive. And I think, this is going to be an important stretch for Sekou, because he's not on the fence of being off the team next year or in deep water, but it just seems like Troy Weaver's going to, move around whatever he feels is necessary to make the team better. And if it doesn't look like a player is producing or he wasn't drafted by Troy Weaver, you want to have your own guys in there. I think there's a distinct possibility that he could be, lumped into a trade with a bad contract to kind of move that contract. Maybe that contract is Blake Griffin. Maybe it's not. But yeah, he has been disappointing, but the rest of the season, now that Blake's not going to suit up again, I think this is a pivotal time for Sekou to really flex his muscles a little bit, at least show something. I mean, even Saben Lee, that most of us kind of, tossed aside in our little preview podcast because we didn't really know how much he was going to contribute. There's a lot of guards on that team. A lot of those guards are now either hurt or have been traded away. So he's had an opportunity. Even he has made the most of his minutes and is, making the most of his time on the court. And I don't think that you can say the same for Sekou, at least not yet.
Yeah, it's been disappointing because the reality of the situation is there's not really an opportunity to send him down to the G League right now. It would have made sense if they could have done it when Blake Griffin was still playing, but the bubble has just started a couple weeks ago, and Sekou was also out with a concussion. It really would have benefited him. I think you made a great point of him being able to go down to the G League and just kind of find himself a little bit, dominate against some lesser competition, build up yourself a little bit, get games where you're playing 35 minutes a night, ideally, and just be able to go down there and do your thing. Now, I will say it doesn't help that the Pistons didn't send down their G League team to the bubble, because you look at this roster and Sekou, Davidas Servidis, and Saben Lee, obviously he looks like he's going to be part of the fixture of the rotation for the current time being. We'll get into that more later. But those are three guys on your roster that should probably be in the G League right now. Just let's be honest. Sekou is not looking like a legitimate NBA player right now. I've given him plenty of time. I still think he does some good things. But him going down to the G League for 3-4 games would do wonders for him. It would do wonders for him. Letting him build a rhythm, gets some legitimate playing time, find confidence would just be huge. And then you also see the added benefit for Saben Lee, Frank Jackson, Davidas Servidis. The Pistons are fortunate that their rookies have no business being in the G League, because then it would look really bad for them to not have their G League team in the bubble. But I think now Sekou's in a spot where there's really not an opportunity for him to go down as to a different team's affiliate and play, because there's no more forwards on this roster. Outside of Jeremy Grant at the 4 spot, the Pistons' only other option is really Sekou, unless they go small and they go with Sadiq. That's kind of their only option. So now Sekou has to kind of prove it. And there's still time left in the season. He has plenty of games left this year to figure it out, this and that. But it needs to start happening at the same time because we're 26 games in, and I'm still just – I'm seeing a very similar player to his rookie season. And he had some great flashes in his rookie season, just like he's had a couple games this year where he's looked the part. But it's got to start to come together completely. By no means am I out on Sekou Doumbouya. He's shown the flashes. He has the tool set. He has a coach in Dwayne Casey that can develop him, has shown he can develop players. If the Pistons continue to put a good support staff around him, and Sekou is committed to growing and getting better, I'm still confident that he's going to figure it out. I think this kid has a lot of potential still. That being said, I really expected more this year, and it's no doubt disappointing that we're still having the games that we're having with Sekou.
You kind of answered my question for you already, is that are you out on Sekou? And it's impossible to be out on a player after a shortened season last year and now a truncated season this year with a lot of inactivity over the summer. He had a couple of personal issues over the summer as well, if I recall correctly. On top of the off time not being around the team, and that really has an effect on guys. Not everybody. Some people can just be away from the team and they're fine. But if you take them out of that structured environment, maybe things change. And I think that was the case for a lot of young guys last year. But what would you have to see? Like what are some theoretical points that Sekou would have to hit for you to be like, okay, this is trending in the right direction? And I don't mean like a stat line. I don't mean like an averaging stat line, because that's not always indicative, especially on bad teams, of players who are playing well or showing improvement. I'm having the same argument with Darius Garland for the Cavs, who had 21 and 8 yesterday. He had 21 points, 8 assists yesterday. And people are saying he should be traded off the team. So, stats are not totally indicative of a player playing well, but what are some things that you would like to see from Sekou before the end of the year that would put you back on the right track of, okay, the team feels that he can be this sort of player, he can do these things, we can kind of see where he fits into the rotation. Like what are you hoping to see?
I think the biggest thing for me is assertiveness. And I want to see Sekou go out there, and I want to see him demand an opportunity, demand shots, demand attention on the court. There are times where he'll get it and, he'll go at the rim. It'll just kind of, nonchalantly go up towards the basket, and he either, misses, gets blocked, the shot gets altered, whatever. Like, this dude is 6'9". He's long. He's athletic. Go at the rim with some power, with some anger, make the defense hit you to stop you. That was something that he was actually doing early in the year very well, is he was attacking the rim and drawing fouls. And now it's just kind of too many shots at the rim where it's just weak, not aggressive. And he needs to be more aggressive. He needs to be more aggressive, not just in that way, but going and getting the basketball, taking the basketball, taking shots, making sure that his minutes on the court, he's visible and he's not just running to a corner and standing there, cut to the basket like he was, again, so good at earlier in the season. Make sure you're getting looks. Rotate around, find the open spot on the court, rebound, attack the glass, do those type of things that where maybe you're not going to get 20 points in a game, but make an impact nonetheless. This is a team that the shot distribution, it's available, because outside of Jeremy Grant, there's really not a guarantee on any given night from anyone. I think Josh Jackson is pretty good at finding his way to get into double figures. Saddiq Bey is getting there as well. But outside of that, there's just a whole lot of opportunity on this team. And again, we're going to talk about him later, but Saben Lee is the perfect example of, finding that opportunity that's there, exposing it and making the most out of it. And that's really what Sekou needs to do, because there is a glaring opportunity for him right now with Blake Griffin out of the fold. He has the opportunity to really cement himself and show why the Pistons were so excited to get him in the last draft. So that's really what I'm looking for. Can Sekou become more aggressive and more dominant in the sense of taking the basketball and making the most out of his minutes?
Right. I mean, he's 6'8", big guy, lanky, and he does need to be aggressive. Now, there's not a whole lot of shooting on the team that I think would make it maybe easier to open things up a bit for him to be aggressive and get downhill. He is athletic enough to do some of that stuff. But yeah, he needs to be more aggressive. That's just kind of the long and short of it. But I am looking at him on cleaning the glass, and his turnover percentage quite a bit lower this year from what it was last year. For what it's worth, obviously, in very, very limited play time and in limited minutes per game. He's only averaging 12 minutes per game, which you probably don't want to see, moving forward. He needs to be getting some more playing time, and that kind of parlays into our another topic that we have later on in the podcast with Dwayne Casey. Other than Sekou, because we've really hammered on Sekou, and I'm starting to feel bad. Anybody other than Sekou and Blake Griffin that you kind of were hoping for more out of, that you would think would have been better? And no, Dennis Smith Jr. doesn't count. He's only been here for a short amount of time. But anybody else that you sort of thought like, I wish they would have been a little bit better at X or whatever?
Yeah, I think Svi could really be your only other answer here outside of maybe Killian Hayes, but with Killian Hayes being limited only 7 games and then getting hurt, I kind of think that disqualifies him as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The rookies have been so solid. Josh Jackson has been good. Jeremy Grant has obviously been very good. I think Svi, not that I really hoped, I wasn't on the Svi can take over the Luke Kennard role, because Svi just doesn't have the ball handling, distributing abilities that Kennard brought to the table. He's a good shooter, no doubt about it, but just doesn't have the same skill set of Kennard. So I never bought into that, but I was certainly hoping that there was going to be more to him this season, and there just really hasn't. That's really that would be the other guy that really sticks out to me in that regard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually combing through the roster here, and Svi is the only one that really makes sense. I mean, I don't really think people had huge expectations for Jahlil Okafor. I mean, maybe if you put down a prop bet for embarrassed Rodney Magruder, you could be disappointed that the Warriors decided to just dismantle him. But other than that, yeah, I kind of was hoping for Svi, because I remember talking about him as a possible, guy who could really blossom into something and make himself more known and really take advantage of some of those minutes, especially since, like I said earlier, the lack of shooting on a team, or at least consistent shooting, because he is a good 3-point shooter. But he definitely hasn't shown it this year in a way that we were hoping for. Plus, there's just a glut of other guys playing well. I don't think anybody expected Saddiq Bey to play this well. And, maybe we did expect Derrick Rose to be traded, but I don't think we expected Killian Hayes to get hurt. Obviously, now Delon Wright is playing more. So injuries and quality play from other players have sort of pushed everything around, and Svi just hasn't quite made the most of his time on the court either. Okay, I think we've drilled that. Speaking of Delon Wright, he's out for the next 2 weeks. Yikes. Point guards just dropping like flies, whether it be a trade or via injury. What sort of move or change do the Pistons need to make to the roster, or should they just stick with Dennis Smith Jr., gulp, and, Frank Jackson, Saben Lee, and this is where we'll get into our Saben Lee discussion.
Yeah, I know it's a scary thought to just stay put, but if I'm Detroit, that's what I'm doing. Again, I know that is very scary, but the flip side is this. You have Saben Lee, who's a rookie point guard, who on Sunday night had a really good game, mind you. Was scoring the ball, attacking the basket, getting to the rim. He rebounded. He had 5 assists. He looked good. He's probably not going to play that good every night, but you have an opportunity right now to give him consistent NBA minutes and allow him time to develop on the court. He's not going to be able to play every single game this year because of the fact that he's on a 2-way contract, and 2-way contracts are limited to 50 days with the main club. So that being said, this is the time for Saben Lee to get the bulk of his opportunity in Detroit this year. With Delon Wright out for the next 2 weeks, Saben Lee can play. I'm not exactly sure how many games the Pistons have over the next 2 weeks, but let's say 6 to 8 games that he can get on the floor and develop. I think the Pistons have to capitalize on that opportunity. I think there was a plan all year that it was likely going to be Killian Hayes rather than Saben Lee, but there was going to be a lot of opportunity for a rookie point guard. And with Hayes hurt and Delon Wright hurt, now it's Saben Lee's opportunity. So I think it's important to make sure that he is a fixture of the rotation for the coming weeks, allowing him time to develop, an opportunity to showcase what he has, because he has, even when he got into the games earlier in the season for sparing minutes, he looked willing and able to contribute at an NBA level. So I think, it would be wise for Detroit to continue to allow him to play and grow. Obviously, Dennis Smith Jr. is a little bit of a different story. He's not been in Detroit very long, and he has struggled more than he has succeeded. That goes for his tenure in the league, not just for his tenure with the Pistons, but through 6 games with Detroit, he's shooting under 31% from the field. He's shooting 25% from the 3-point line. He's averaging just 2.5 assists compared to 1.7 turnovers per game. He has been far from good. But the Pistons are not competing for a playoff spot. And at this point, what does it hurt to continue to play Dennis Smith Jr. and see if he can figure it out? I just think that the smartest decision for them is to continue to roll with Dennis Smith Jr. and Saben Lee, and then on a nightly basis, roll with the hot hand, hopefully, that one of them has. Because Dennis Smith Jr. is still just 23, and he might have value as an NBA player. He hasn't had the best opportunities since his rookie season in Dallas. So you might as well, while you are one of the worst teams in the league, give him that playing time to see if there is anything there. Outside of those two, you can go to Frank Jackson if you really needed a third point guard. I don't see the value in giving up an asset to bring in a point guard when you're hoping that Delon Wright is back within a couple weeks, and you're hoping that Killian Hayes can return to the court in probably a month or a little over a month in a hopeful scenario, because that's your true point guard rotation when all things shake out. You're likely closing the season, if both are healthy, with Killian Hayes and Delon Wright, unless Delon Wright slides back into a 2-guard spot and someone like Dennis Smith Jr. or Saben Lee has, showcased, hey, they deserve nightly minutes. Delon Wright and Killian Hayes are likely your end-of-season point guard rotation, assuming that Hayes has healed enough to return to the court. I don't think it makes sense to trade an asset to get another point guard. They just traded for a point guard in Dennis Smith Jr. You might as well allow him and Saben Lee the opportunity on a nightly basis to play, to develop. You have Frank Jackson if necessary. And again, what is the cost of going and getting a placeholder point guard for a couple of weeks? Is it worth giving up some sort of asset? Not for the worst team in the league, no.
I would agree with that, and I'm trying to scramble and find the roster. I don't think the Pistons have an open roster spot, do they?
No, they don't.
No, I didn't think so, because I was looking through the free agent point guards as well. I mean, there's your usual suspects lately: Yogi Ferrell, Tim Frazier, Frank Mason, Emmanuel Mudiay. I mean, he's like on the same sort of redemption path as Dennis Smith Jr., but even more so, Shabazz Napier, Elliot Kobo, Gary Payton II. Yeah, I think you're better off just sticking with Dennis Smith Jr., seeing what you got, and maybe, I mean, you really hope it's just the jitters at this point. I mean, he really got no playing time in New York. Emmanuel quickly just supplanted him almost immediately. Derrick Rose definitely would have supplanted him had he not been the return for Rose. And, I really hope it's just the jitters, because there's really no reason that he should be nervous right now. I think the right mindset needs to be to just relax. You're on the worst team in the league, although I think the Cavs would like to make an argument there, currently at least.
Hey, I saw your tweet earlier.
You have playing time.
Not a fan of your tweet from earlier.
Well, we're coming for at least a top 3 pick. How many point guards do you need? Although I guess how many point guards do the Cavs need?
He's gonna look great with Killian Hayes and Sadiq Bey. That 1-2-3 combo is gonna be deadly. That
will be a lot of fun. And then you can put Grant back his normal spot. Ooh, that is juicy. I would be fine with Kuminga, to be quite honest, because he fits a lot of what the Cavs desperately need. But that's for a not so distant future podcast is when we talk about draft stuff. I think you just roll with Dennis Smith Jr., see what he's got left or what he can provide. Maybe he's just trying to do too much. He is athletic. He showed a lot of poise in college, leading a pretty bad NC State team. He was very quickly shipped out of Dallas and fell out of favor in New York, so there's obviously a lot of question marks there. But for the next 2 weeks, or at least the duration of Delon Wright's injury, you're going to face the Magic again. That's who the Pistons play on the 23rd. That'd be tomorrow. They play the Pelicans the day after. And then Sacramento, followed by the last day in February, you play the New York Knicks, and then you head into March playing Toronto, and then the Knicks again on the 2nd and the 4th of March, respectively. So that's some not great teams and some not great defenses. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't assume the Knicks are a bad defense, because they're the Knicks. They're actually playing pretty well this year, and they do have a pretty okay defense. That being said, Orlando, the Pelicans, the Kings were on pace to be one of the absolute worst defenses. So there's a lot of opportunity there to put up some points. I don't think you need to go get another point guard. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Roll with what you have. Roll with what you got. Maybe Killian Hayes does come back, and then you just bump the line down. But it doesn't make any sense to move anybody for a point guard right now. It's just, there are more pressing matters, and one of those pressing matters is to see what you got, see what you have. So that kind of leads into another discussion regarding Dwayne Casey. And this sort of came into the fold because the Minnesota Timberwolves recently moved on from Ryan Saunders. They replaced him with Chris Finch in a very bizarre, had we not been going through a pandemic, I think this would have been a lot more bizarre. An assistant picking up and leaving from one team and going to another team immediately. That's pretty weird. I don't know the last time that's happened.
Yeah, I saw the tweet that the Timberwolves were moving on from Ryan Sanders. I didn't see the tweet until the morning that they already hired Chris Finch, but that only came like minutes after it was tweeted that they were moving on from Ryan Saunders, excuse me. What an odd thing. Like,
that's weird.
That's gotta, like, it definitely hurts to lose your job, but to like have your replacement like ready in the wings, like right there, that's gotta hurt a little bit more. Like, that's
right.
Have we seen that before? Because I certainly don't recall this happening.
From a different team, I don't think so. Not since Lionel Hollins. I'll have to find the tweet. I think it was Lionel Hollins left and took the Memphis job, and he changed teams mid-season. And I think that's the last time that's happened. And he was actually, that was a good move. That was the grit and grind Grizzlies, who I think that's everyone has a soft spot for those Grizzlies teams. I think that's the last time it's happened. And David Vanterpool, a very well-regarded assistant, was passed up on the job and then was given to Chris Finch. He was also a very highly regarded assistant. I think being head coach was in the near future for him. But it sort of got us on the topic of Dwayne Casey. Bet Online, which, make of it what you will, they have Dwayne Casey as the second most likely candidate or head coach currently to be fired at the end of the season after Luke Walton. So the Pistons have a very young team. They have a very unfinished team, a very unfinished product. They have Jeremy Grant, who's good, but Griffin's gone. You're going to get Killian Hayes back. You're going to get a top 3 pick, hopefully, in the draft. This is far from a finished product. You're going to have a couple other moves in there to fill out the roster and whatnot, and then you'll be off to the races to move on to the next step of the rebuild. Is Dwayne Casey going to be here for that part of the rebuild, or is he a candidate to be fired?
I guess there's some mixed thoughts on this, but I didn't even think it would. It's plausible to think that he will be fired at the end of the season. I think that Dwayne Casey is in an incredibly safe position. I think that there's an understanding that this is a change for the organization, a change for the franchise. And Troy Weaver seems to really be behind Dwayne Casey. In fairness, this team, granted they have one of the worst records in the league, does come out on a nightly basis and compete with every team that they play. There have been just a few games this year where they have been, incredibly outplayed, didn't look good. In general, they have competed in every game. They've beaten some good teams. They've taken teams to overtime. Like, they have earned their wins. They have earned their, title as scrappy. No one's getting through the Pistons easily on a given night right now. That's giving credit to Dwayne Casey where credit is due when you look at this roster. When he has rookies contributing, starting, playing big minutes, taking a lot of shots, like, that is good coaching. And there's something to be said about the culture that he is building in Detroit. It's allowed Jeremy Grant and Josh Jackson to have career seasons. It's allowed Sadiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart to come in and have good rookie seasons, maybe great in terms of Sadiq Bey's year so far. And we'll see what happens with Dennis Smith Jr. and Sekou Doumbouya and Killian Hayes when he returns. Can those guys try to replicate that type of success that these other players are having under Dwayne Casey? Delon Wright, another example. And Delon Wright was, someone that said, I wanted to come to Detroit because I wanted to play for Dwayne Casey. And Wright has had probably his most productive season so far. He's averaging over 10 points per game, 5 assists. He's shooting the ball pretty well. Currently, he's at 38.4% from the three-point line. That would be the second highest percentage in his career. In his rookie season, he shot 38.5%. So he's right there, and he's also shooting 2 more attempts per game on average. So really, he's having a career year as well. Players are just playing better right now under Dwayne Casey, and I don't think that they would be playing this well under different coaches. I think that's where you have to give Casey credit. I think his job is as safe as it could be. I don't think that there's any thought process behind, oh, well, this team is really underperforming. Why are they coming out and getting blown out of the water every night? This isn't your typical rebuilding team. They're taking their opponent to the final whistle every game. They're winning games against good teams, and the young guys are looking good. So I think Dwayne Casey is very, very safe, would not be worried about his job at all. I am incredibly confident that he will be the head coach next season.
This is kind of what his thing was in Toronto as well, if I'm not mistaken. The Raptors were terrible at first. Looking at the record here, 23 and 43 in his first year, bad. 34 and 48 in his second year, bad. 2013-14, okay. They're 48 and 34. They've grown up. They've made some moves. And now, under him, they never lost, more than 33 games at all. Under him, 49, 33, 56, 26. I mean, they were a good team. So he started at the bottom and they got better. And here is the real nail in the Dwayne Casey's going to be fired coffin. He's still under contract until 2024, making $7 million a year. I mean, Troy Weaver loves a good buyout, as we could see by Blake Griffin. I don't think he's going to buy out Dwayne Casey. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless Dwayne Casey's like, I don't want to be here anymore. I will forego $7 million annually to change teams. I've proven my worth here in Detroit that I could coach a playoff team. I just don't think that's the mentality at all. And I don't think that the Pistons would like to do that. I think uprooting a rebuild by changing the coach too frequently is borderline. It's just horrible. It's
bad practice.
It's bad, and it gives you a bad reputation around the league, and it's just mismanagement from the front office perspective. I mean, we see these coaches. We just saw one yesterday. The Timberwolves, I consider a rebuilding team. They're still rebuilding after losing Jimmy Butler because he was obviously the best player on that team. It wasn't close, but you have Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. You just got the number 1 pick in Edwards, and they are a rebuilding team. They fired their head coach, and maybe it was warranted. He hadn't been good for some time. Was not the guy to lead the way since Tom Thibodeau was the head coach. But you look at all these rebuilding teams moving coaches around, and the Philadelphia 76ers are an example of a team that did not. They stuck with Brett Brown. They stuck with him. They weathered the storm, which there were many. The teams were horrifically bad, but they kept him in place. They arguably did not give him the correct tools to ultimately win when it mattered, when he had Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. But they got better. They grew together, and I think that's really important. And I just keep bringing it back to the woeful Cavs. I mean, they went from Ty Lue, said, heck no, get me out of here, to Larry Drew, who hated that first season so bad he almost never wanted to coach again, to John Beilein, now to JB Bickerstaff. And JB is on this list of potential fired coaches too. I mean, he's right behind Mike Malone at 14-1 odds. So it's like changing coaches all the time is almost just as bad, if not worse, for a rebuilding team than like blowing a draft pick or maybe getting hosed on a bit of a trade. It sets you back almost equally because it destabilizes whatever structure you were building, and it gives you a bad reputation around the league. So I agree. I don't think they're going to move on from Dwayne Casey. They don't really have any incentive to from a financial or basketball court perspective. It's just not necessary to do that. But it is interesting. So this is a fun little exercise. Let's look at the list of coaches here. I have it pulled up here. Dwayne Casey has the second highest odds. Let's go through the coaches. Which coaches do you think do have higher odds than him to be fired? That should be higher. I mean, Luke Walton being one. I don't know how much I agree with that, but it's the Sacramento Kings, so it's entirely possible that he is, fired within the next couple of days.
I don't.
Scott Brooks. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't see why. I mean, Sacramento, they're not. They just always don't seem happy with their coach. They had a good coach years ago in Mike Malone, and they let him go. So I don't think anyone's ever safe in Sacramento. And to
Dave Yeager.
Yeah, I mean, to their credit, it's not like they are good this season. They're 12-18. They're another team that started off the year pretty good, but has cooled off. I don't know. I don't think anyone's ever safe in Denver. Sacramento, pardon.
Scott Brooks. Scott Brooks should have been fired years ago.
Yep.
Steve Clifford. That Orlando team is banged up. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could justify it. They made the playoffs last year, but they are banged up.
No Markelle Fultz. No Aaron Gordon. Evan Fournier has missed some games.
No Jonathan Isaac.
No Jonathan Isaac. I mean, Steve Clifford.
That's hard.
I don't think so personally. I mean, maybe he's not your title winning coach, but they're not a title winning team anyway. I don't think that's a fair. I don't think that's fair to him.
I would totally agree. It's much like the Charlotte days with him, where they were okay. They never got over the hump. They maybe won a couple playoff games, but that was it. Lloyd Pierce, that one's interesting to me, considering how many moves the Hawks have made. Their offense is. I was just looking at the stat the other day. Their offense is like, for how many players that they have who are just knockdown shooters, their offense is not very good. They do have an okay offensive rating, but their shooting isn't very good. Middle of the pack in true shooting percentage. They're horrible defensively, obviously. But they're 22nd in three-point field goals, 21st in three-point field goals attempted, and 20th in field goal percentage overall. I feel like they should be a lot better than that, considering the players that they have and the young players that have stepped up. DeAndre Hunter has been quite good, and he's missed some time. Cam Reddish came on stronger in the later part of last year. And you obviously have Trae Young, but you added Bojan Bogdanovic. You added Danilo Gallinari. So it's just really weird that their offense, which should have been pretty freaking good, is just not that good. And then Mike Malone, and then J.B. Bickerstaff, and Mike Budenholzer's right after there. And that kind of gets interesting. And the rest of the coaches are just whatever. Rick Carlisle's not going to get fired. Eric Spoelstra's not going to get fired. Terry Stotts isn't going to get fired. I don't know why Hornets would get rid of James Borrego. And Stan Van Gundy's not getting fired. And Brad Stevens, I guess, unless the Celtics completely fall through the cracks in the ice and drown, I don't see him being fired either. But I think that you can make the case that at least Lloyd Pierce and at least Scott Brooks be higher than Dwayne Casey on that list.
Agreed. one thing I'll say in the Hawks is it is very interesting that what I'll say is this. I would not put it past the Hawks firing Lloyd Pierce, even though I think it would be the wrong decision. I would not put it past them to do so because Travis Schlenk and company have taken a very aggressive approach with this franchise. They're adamant about getting into the playoffs. It's why they were so aggressive in getting Bojan Bogdanovic and getting, Bogdan Bogdanovic and Danilo Gallinari in the offseason. So I would not be surprised if they made a quick decision and fired him because they seem, hard pressed to get to the playoffs, kind of like the Pistons were a couple of years ago under Tom Gores. and Ed Stefanski. So I could definitely see them making a change. Not that I agree with it, but I could see him doing it.
Yeah, I don't agree with moving on from Lloyd Pierce either. There's just something about him. I just like him as a coach. I don't know why, but that's a Trae Young microaggression. Get me to the playoffs. I'm good enough right now type of move. Because it really started even last year when they traded for Clint Capella. Get me the big center. They were one of the teams that was in on Andre Drummond. They were one of the teams that was in on Steven Adams. And, they ended up getting Clint Capella, which has worked out pretty nicely. But I don't think they should move on from Lloyd Pierce necessarily. I think they need some more time. I mean, they added so many pieces. You can't just expect all those pieces to immediately fit perfectly in the machine and start spinning flawlessly. It's going to take time. It's going to take practice, which a lot of these teams aren't really having much of. You're not really having much practice time. And that's playing a huge factor. So we kind of just are going to come back to it. Probably should not fire Dwayne Casey. The Pistons have shown a nice ability to, at least this year, show stability in the face of some adversity. They've shown the ability to be reasonable with their players, with Blake Griffin wanting out, and they've shown the ability to draft well and get pieces through the draft, wherever that may be. It doesn't have to be top 10. Jeremy Grant wanted to be here, wanted to play for Troy Weaver, wanted to play for Dwayne Casey. Those things can't be discounted, especially in this current era of the NBA. On a side note, do you think the Pistons lead the league in players that their former teams wish they still had? Because they have Delon Wright, and I would think the Mavericks would like his shot-making ability. And they have Jeremy Grant, who the Nuggets could most definitely need. They beat the snot out of the Cavs, but that offense is so freaking good. If they had even 70% of this version of Jeremy Grant, they would be much better defensively on the wing, and they would have yet another offensive player to throw out there. And then maybe Mason Plumlee can count too. I don't know. I mean, he's a triple-double machine now, apparently. They have a lot of players that these former teams, I think, would really want. And you could probably use
Wayne Ellington's teams. I mean, the guy's played for a lot of teams, so I think all of
that's very true.
Would like to have him.
That's an excellent point. Josh Jackson,
Memphis. Memphis could use him. I get they just got Justice Winslow back, so that's another wing that they have alongside Dylan Brooks and Grayson Allen and Kyle Anderson. But hey, I think Josh Jackson is a guy that is just going to continue to get better. I mean, he's doing some really nice things right now, and he is still very, very young. You can tell that he is still underdeveloped. So if he can continue to polish his game, like that is a player, when you talk about polishing your game, that is the definition of a player that needs to polish his game. It's very raw, but it is talented. It needs to be smoothed out and become more refined.
Yes, and I actually forgot that Justice Winslow was on the Memphis Grizzlies until I saw everybody. Right, until everybody was retweeting that one picture from the Grizzlies PR on Twitter saying, "Oh my God, he's active and playing." Good for Memphis. They just seem to find some strange diamonds in the rough always. But yeah, the Pistons have some guys that I think the former teams of these players could probably really use them back. So it's nice that the Pistons are coming out on top and have some other teams a little bit green with envy. So Aaron, that's the topics that we have. We just went through them all. Dwayne Casey probably shouldn't be fired. Point guard position, stick it out, see what happens. See what the second half of the schedule is going to look like, and maybe Killian Hayes will be able to come back and provide a little bit of stability. And the most disappointing Piston, I think you could chalk it up to, other than Blake Griffin, Sekou or Svi Mikhailuk.
Yeah. I think we did a lot this podcast, and we accomplished some good Piston discussion. I mean, it's not always easy to talk about the on-court day-to-day, week-to-week performance of the team, but you'll find topics to talk about, and pretty soon we're going to be talking about some draft stuff with this team. But I love how we can get to all these different things in one show. I think there's always going to be something to talk about with this team. There'll be different storylines. Hopefully, Killian Hayes will be back sooner rather than later, and we'll get to see him again this season. We should have some Blake.
This is the part where Blake Griffin signs with a different team, right?
Yeah,
we'll post the podcast and he'll sign with somebody. That's how this goes.
This is going to post, and then Blake Griffin has been traded to the Miami Heat for Myers Leonard and the corpse
Kelly
of
Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk, so he can pull some elbows out of some arms.
Great, he's gonna rip freaking Sadiq Bey's arm off in the middle of practice.
Yeah, that Miami team did something. They need a shot in the arm.
They do need a shot in the arm. They need Bradley Beal. They need Bradley Beal.
Oh boy, here we go. Here we go. I mean, I don't mean to, disparage that, but the Washington Wizards are playing well.
Are they really? I haven't even.
Washington Wizards are 10-17. They have won 4 in a row.
Wow.
And don't look now, but they're only 3 games out of the 8th seed, which is a huge, massive indictment of the Eastern Conference. They've pulled all the way to 13th.
They only
they're right there. Right. And this is kind of what I thought at the beginning of the year, that you have Bradley Beal, you have Russell Westbrook. Those are not the worst cards to have in your hand if your goal is to make the playoffs. You could have far worse cards. And I'm sure that other teams won't say it publicly, but if you get into a playoff matchup, like if you are the Boston Celtics and you right the ship enough and you draw a matchup against the Washington Wizards, you're not going to be scared of them. But having Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, those are 2 guys that if they cook for just 3 games out of like 6, that's not a team that you want to play. You do not want to be on the wrong side of one of those 2 or both of them just blowing up.
It's possible, no doubt. It's possible.
It's possible. I don't know if Bradley Beal will get moved, but maybe. But it won't be to the Detroit Pistons.
No, certainly not. Hey, that's a pipe dream from like 2 seasons ago. That's a 2018, 2019 pipe dream. This is 2021 now. Now we're trying to figure out how the Pistons are going to get more top draft picks.
Right. Or how can we leverage Jahlil Okafor? God, that is the immediate fall from grace to let's get Bradley Beal to wonder what teams we're willing to give up for Jahlil Okafor. That is
goodness.
I mean, if there is a teeter-totter, that is the world's biggest teeter-totter, and it has swung wildly to the other side. Aaron, anything else that you want to cover for this podcast or for the future of this podcast or for
I think we better
Pistons?
quit. We better quit while we're ahead before we do a deep dive on Jahlil Okafor. But I'll tell you this: very exciting times for the Palace of Pistons podcast. Excited for our future. We're so thankful to all the supporters that have helped make this possible in our new partnership. We are looking forward to the future of the Palace of Pistons podcast, some great shows, perhaps some great guests. Again, thank you to everyone for your support over the years, for making this possible. Truly never thought that I would, be sitting in my basement, 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, just wanting to talk about the Pistons and could turn it into something like this and have so many people on a weekly basis tune in, send messages, asking, my thoughts or this and that. So very, very much appreciated. I'm very, very excited for the future of the podcast. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, and that was not a eulogy. It started to sound a little bit like a eulogy. This is not the end of the podcast. We're going to keep doing it. But yes, some exciting things to share down the road for the future of this pod. And hopefully the future is just as exciting for the Detroit Pistons. And you can get all of that coverage and more at palaceofpistons.com as well. Check it out. We have lots of written articles. We have some excellent YouTube content as well. You can search us on YouTube. And and this podcast, keep listening to the podcast. Certainly present your thoughts to us. We'd love to hear it to make this show better. We really do want to expand ourselves in how we cover the Pistons and how you want to see that coverage. We think that's very important. So certainly let us know wherever you get your podcast. Let us know in the comments, in the reviews, and please don't give us 1 star. We try really hard. 1 star is just cruel. But Aaron, anything else?
No, I think we've got it all in there. I'm ready I'm already ready for the next show. Let's just do it now. We'll pre-record it.
Okay, we'll just get ready. Okay, so Derrick Rose. Okay. All right. With that, thank you all very, very, very much. For Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. This has been the Palace Pistons Podcast, and we will see you next time.